What if I told you that the flood, that event that should have wiped every trace of the Nephilim from the earth, did it not work as everyone believes, because centuries later they reappear, strong, organized, and even more dangerous? The Bible records giants living in Canaan, colossal warriors confronting Israel, monstrous kings like Og of Bashan, beings that simply, they shouldn't exist, and yet they were there. The question no one wants to face is simple and terrifying. How did an entire race of forbidden hybrids come to walk among men again, after being destroyed by the waters? There are verifiable facts in the scriptures that contradict the official version. There are clues buried in archaeology, ancient accounts, and details ignored for centuries. And when you connect these pieces, a disturbing truth begins to emerge. The Nephilim may not have disappeared. They may have adapted, or worse, returned with a purpose. Today, you'll discover exactly how this comeback was possible, and why it matters more now than ever. In this video, you won't hear superficial interpretations. You'll see, with your own eyes, true facts from the Bible, what many ignore. Accounts that prove the Nephilim not only returned after the flood, but continued to influence entire peoples. Today, you will understand the two strongest theories about this survival: the repetition of corruption by the fallen angels, or the secret persistence of contaminated lineages among Noah's descendants. You will also see why giants like the Anakim, Rephaim, and Emim suddenly appear in the post-flood world, how entire cities were shaped by this presence, and why Israel faced not only nations, but hybrid creatures. Furthermore, we will reveal historical clues and hidden details that indicate the return of the Nephilim was no accident. It was part of a much larger plan. And in the end, you will have a new perspective on what really happened, and on what may yet return. Before we delve any deeper into this mystery, and I need to be honest, what you're about to hear, this is not common content. This isn't the kind of explanation you find in sermons, nor what you'll find in superficial videos about giants in the Bible. What we're about to reveal requires courage, an open mind, and a genuine interest in the truth. This video is part of a much larger investigation into the Nephilim, the fallen angels, and the corruption that changed the course of human history. And if you truly want to understand how these beings were able to return after the flood, and what that means for today, then you need to watch this series to the end. Therefore, before proceeding, I ask you for a simple but essential gesture. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. It's not just about supporting the content, it's about ensuring you don't miss a single chapter of this investigation. Each episode connects pieces that have been hidden for centuries. Each video reveals details that dismantle superficial beliefs and show the true extent of what happened in the post-flood world. When new chapters are released, exploring hybrid bloodlines, giant kingdoms, spirit wars, and the predicted return at the end of times, you will be among the first to understand what is truly at stake. Then click on Sign Up Now. Not because it's my request, but because what comes next will forever change the way you read the Bible and how you see the world around you. Now let's continue. The story of the Nephilim's return is only just beginning, and the most disturbing answers are yet to come. Imagine the earth right after the flood. The waters begin to recede, revealing a silent, devastated, unrecognizable world. The ancient mountains seem like ruins of a faded past. The air still carries the scent of a planet forcibly purified, and atop the ark, Noah and his family observe the gray landscape, believing that everything that represented corruption has been destroyed. It was a new beginning, a world reborn. The sky seemed clear, the stars seemed brighter, and humanity would finally have the chance to follow the right path. A path far from the influence of the fallen angels and the monstrosity of the Nephilim. But what no one knew was that beneath that appearance of peace and renewal, ancient seeds still pulsed. Spiritual seeds, genetic seeds, And as generations passed, unsettling signs began to emerge in isolated regions. Exceptionally strong peoples, disproportionately tall warriors, lineages that exhibited characteristics that were not merely human. Imagine entire tribes watching from the hilltops as beings approached that looked like men, but larger, more violent, more cunning, creatures reminiscent of the chaos that preceded the flood. Men who were 3, 4, 5 meters tall, kings whose beds were larger than entire rooms, wars in which Israel faced forces that seemed to come from another world. A strange pattern began to emerge in the old accounts. First, inexplicably fortified cities, then deformed corpses described in forgotten texts, and finally, the worst clue of all, well-known names: Anakims, Rephanes, Emins, Zuzins, descendants of giants, all this in a world that was believed to be purified. The question that echoed in the shadows was inevitable. How is that possible? Where did these new giants come from? Did the Nephilim really disappear, or were they just waiting for the right time to return? The post-flood world seemed calm, but something dormant was awakening. And what humanity thought it had conquered was only just beginning again. The great problem that haunts the post-diluvian world is simple, straightforward, and utterly disturbing. The Nephilim reappeared where there shouldn't have been even a single trace of them. The Bible makes it clear that the flood was a judgment not only against corrupt humanity, but against a hybrid race created by the fallen angels, a race that threatened to replace God's plan for mankind. However, when you turn a few pages in the scriptures, something strange happens. They're there again, giants walking between cities, dominating territories, intimidating nations, confronting Israel in real wars. The newly renewed world is beginning to show signs of the same corruption that existed before the global destruction. This is not a legend, it's not a metaphor. These are specific biblical records, with names, locations, and testimonies. You find the Anakims terrorizing Canaan. Find them Rephanes, giants known as shadows of the dead. Find kings like Og of Basan, whose bed was almost 4 meters wide. They all lived after the flood. They were all described as descendants of a lineage that should have been wiped out. This is the central problem. Either the flood failed, or there was a deeper plan at play. The reappearance of the Nephilim calls into question everything we know about the history of humanity. Because if they returned once, despite a global catastrophe sent directly by God, then the question that echoes in the silence is inevitable. Who or what opened the door again? Have the fallen angels themselves returned? Or did some contaminated lineage survive within Noah's own family? The truth is that the return of the Nephilim reveals a spiritual conflict that never ended. They were not merely remnants, they were a sign that the old rebellion was still active, silent, patient, waiting for the right moment to manifest itself again. And that's the enigma we're going to unravel next. To understand how the Nephilim were able to return after the flood, we need to explore 2 main lines of investigation, one supernatural and the other historical. And surprisingly, both converge on equally unsettling conclusions. The first theory is supernatural. She claims that just as before the flood, some fallen angels descended to earth again and repeated the transgression, corrupting human women and generating a new hybrid lineage. However, this theory faces a significant obstacle. The texts of Judas 1:6 and St. Pedro 2:5, they claim that the angels who committed this sin were chained in eternal prisons, in deep darkness. This indicates that God would not allow the same rebellion to be repeated with impunity. That's where the second theory comes in, historical and genetic. And perhaps the most disturbing, the contamination of the Nephilim may not have been completely eliminated in pre-flood humanity. There are ancient manuscripts, such as the Book of Enoch, and apocryphal fragments that suggest that not only the giants, but also part of the genetic corruption, it could have gone unnoticed for generations and survived within Noah's own family. If some residual gene was present in the wives of Noah's sons, something inherited unknowingly, it could have manifested itself again in later generations, giving rise to the Anakim, Rephaim, and all the other giants reported in Canaan. It wouldn't be the first time a hidden genetic trait resurfaced centuries later. This would explain why the descendants of Ham, and especially Canaan, were associated with giant peoples, supernaturally strong warriors, and impregnable cities. Another clue lies in the territorial behavior of these peoples. Each giant group that appears in the scriptures establishes itself strategically in key regions: mountains, strongholds, fertile valleys. This suggests consciousness, organization, and hereditary memory, as if they carried an ancient mission to rebuild the domain that the Nephilim possessed before the flood. These two origins, spiritual and genetic, together form a single dark truth. Something too old to disappear and too powerful to be ignored remained alive on Earth. The return of the Nephilim was no accident. It was a consequence. When we observe the narrative of the fallen angels and the Nephilim, we realize that their impact was not limited to a distant past. It is as if the shadow of their rebellion continues to loom over humanity to this day, a distant echo that still influences cultures, behaviors, and fears that have never completely disappeared. The corruption they introduced, this forbidden mixture of the divine and the human, left an invisible scar on history, like an ancestral trauma that we cannot forget. The moral decay that began before the flood was not merely the result of unbridled violence and lust. It was the gradual loss of a sense of limits, of the perception that there are boundaries that cannot be crossed without something essential breaking within us. The ancients recount that men learned from the Watchers not only arts and crafts, but also obsessions, vices, deceptions, and forms of manipulation that became part of human nature. The chaos that spread was born not only from the strength of the giants, but from the internal corruption that spread silently, like poison dissolved in water. And if we're honest, doesn't it seem like we're living through something similar? Today, perhaps there aren't giants walking among us, but moral decay continues to infiltrate every corner of society. The insatiable pursuit of power, subtle manipulation, the loss of fundamental values, the abandonment of the sacred in exchange for the immediate. Humanity has always believed it could play with forces it doesn't understand, just as angels believed they could defy the divine order. The result? A civilization that is increasingly fast-paced and increasingly empty, connected but lonely, full of knowledge but poor in wisdom. The same spiral that led to the flood seems to be returning in new forms, new languages, new vices, but always with the same essence. A gradual, almost imperceptible distancing from the light until darkness becomes the norm. The story of the fallen angels is not just an ancient tale, it's a mirror, a reflection of what happens when beings, celestial or human, lose sight of who they should be. If there is one point that terrifies open-minded scholars, theologians, and archaeologists, it is this: the fallen angels corrupted humanity not only with violence, but with knowledge. Not just any knowledge, forbidden knowledge, delivered prematurely to a race that was not yet prepared to handle such a responsibility. And according to the Book of Enoch, this is precisely what accelerated the destruction of the pre-flood world. The Watchers taught men things that should never have been revealed: enchantments, energy manipulation, advanced astrology, metallurgy, weapons of destruction, complex cosmology, and secrets of nature that could transform any civilization, for good or for evil. And as often happens when something powerful falls into unstable hands, that which should have uplifted, destroyed. It is impossible to ignore how this same pattern appears in all ancient cultures. Peoples separated by oceans and eras share stories of beings who descended from the sky to teach agriculture, astronomy, megalithic architecture, medicine, and occult arts. And much of this knowledge emerges abruptly in human history, as if it had been artificially inserted, not developed gradually. Today, when we observe impossible monuments, ancient maps containing knowledge that should only have existed thousands of years later, or civilizations that mastered mathematics and engineering without any logical explanation, the question returns like an unsettling whisper. Are we seeing the traces of the Watchers, a silent testament to the fact that they truly walked among our ancestors? Forbidden technology did not disappear in the flood. It survived in fragments, in symbols, in hidden traditions, and secret societies that claim to preserve the wisdom of the ancients. Perhaps that is why humanity advances so quickly and falters so easily, as if it carried knowledge that it never knew how to use responsibly. And what's most unsettling is imagining that if this technology was in the hands of the Nephilim, it may be returning. In the shadows of archaeology, in the accelerated scientific progress, in genetic experiments that push boundaries, many believe that we are repeating the exact same mistake that caused the fall of the ancient world. Because every time a man gets too close to the forbidden, something observes and something awakens. When forbidden knowledge and the presence of the Nephilim spread throughout the post-flood world, something began to happen silently, but devastatingly. Moral corruption has once again taken root in humanity, as if the storm that God had tried to extinguish were resurfacing through the cracks that were never fully closed. The scriptures show clear signs of this decadence. Entire peoples began to worship hybrid creatures, erecting colossal statues to gods who demanded blood, torture, and rituals of submission. The cities descended from Canaan, cursed from birth, adopted practices that reflected exactly the same chaos of the pre-flood world: extreme immorality, ritualistic violence, and child sacrifices. All this did not arise from nothing. It is the kind of corruption that accompanies the fragments of the Nephilim lineage. The presence of the post-flood giants is always accompanied by signs of cultural degradation. Where the Rephaim lived, fear reigned. Where the Anakim walked, oppression settled in like a permanent shadow. The Bible describes these peoples as terrible, enormous, inhuman, and whenever Israel approached one of their cities, it encountered not only colossal warriors, but entire civilizations dominated by cruelty, spiritual promiscuity, and the destruction of everything pure. But corruption was not confined to neighboring cultures. It began to infiltrate the very human soul. It was as if the memory of the ancient world, the world that God destroyed to save the future, was attempting to be reborn. And, as the centuries passed, humanity seemed increasingly fascinated by the same kind of power that had driven the fallen angels to rebellion. What is most disturbing is that this decadence did not remain in the past. Today, it echoes in the choices of modern humanity: the cult of power, the unbridled pursuit of limitless knowledge, genetic manipulation, the normalization of evil disguised as progress. Many scholars argue that we are not evolving. We are retracing the path that destroyed the ancient world. The utter corruption of Noah's day was not just a historical event, it was a warning. And if the Nephilim truly had a second chance to shape human destiny after the flood, perhaps we are now living through a third. Because every time humanity gets too close to darkness, the doors that should never be opened begin to move again. If the story had ended here, with the Nephilim destroyed, the fallen angels imprisoned, and humanity freed from corruption, perhaps the world would be different. But the scriptures, ancient books, and even archaeological findings seem to whisper a disturbing truth. The cycle is not over. He simply changed form. While in the past giants visibly walked among men, today many believe they act in a much more subtle and much more profound way. Evidence is scattered in narratives that survive in isolated cultures, in symbols replicated by civilizations that never met, in royal lineages that claim descent from the gods, and even in modern phenomena that still lack a logical explanation. And here comes the question that will open our next investigation. If the fallen angels were imprisoned, who is guiding the continuation of the Nephilim lineage? Something or someone kept this heritage alive. It may have been through rituals, spiritual manipulations, blood preserved in powerful families, or even through unseen influences operating behind political systems and global structures. There are also ancient accounts that describe the awakening of entities after long periods of silence. Apocryphal texts speak of portals that can be reopened, of spiritual prisons that are not eternal, and of cosmic cycles in which ancient beings return to interfere in the human world. What if this cycle is reaching its critical point again? In the next episode, we will reveal where, according to the Bible and ancient Jewish texts, the fallen angels are truly imprisoned. What do these places represent spiritually? And why do some believe they are weakening? Archaeological and geographical evidence pointing to specific regions of the planet with unusual activity, as if something were trying to emerge. And the most disturbing thing, if the vigilantes' prison has flaws, what would happen if they returned? Get ready, because if the tracks of the Nephilim survived the flood, whispers suggest that their creators may not be as asleep as we imagine.